Now, at what point did you decide I actually want to get into this business as a performer? Do you remember the moment where you decided I got to go pursue this?
Well, I dabbled a little bit with wrestling, but years earlier I was helping out in other ways, even like when I was in high school. I would help my mom in the office sometimes with the payroll, and I kind of knew which wrestlers had been performing on the road, and so sometimes she would check with me and say which wrestlers wrestled in which towns and which ones do we have to pay, and I kind of knew a lot of that information, even though I wasn't at a lot of the shows, but I used to just kind of study and memorize the lineups of the matches, so I used to help her with the payroll quite often on Fridays. And then I started helping write the program articles. And we had a program called The Body Press that came out every week. And um, I really enjoyed writing. I enjoyed writing in school, like language arts classes and journalism and creative writing. So I started writing, with a little guidance and editing from my mom. And then I became sort of a correspondent for different wrestling magazines about Stampede Wrestling. I would send results and reports, about different matches and feuds and newcomers that were really catching on in the territory. So I started doing a lot of that, and typing releases for advertisers for the out of town shows. So I was doing a lot of that, and even TV production with Stampede Wrestling before I ever stepped in the ring in a match. And that probably wasn't until the mid 80s, that I actually had my first match. And but I was pretty well schooled in other aspects of wrestling, the booking side, the creative side, the television side. I had exposure to all those fields, before I actually stepped in the ring as a performer.
Now, with all that knowledge that you were gaining, behind the scenes, entering the ring is a whole different animal on itself because it's a lot of physicality and you're not used to working, your body in certain ways. Talk to me about training. I'm sure you got to train in the dungeon as well with your dad.
Yeah, I can tell you it's certainly different being a performer in the ring than just watching it. When you're in the ring, you're the one being watched by fans. Your peers and other wrestlers are watching you, and you're nervous and you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to mess up on a high spot or embarrass yourself. So it's intimidating, the first few matches, and if you're lucky, you're working with a really experienced veteran, a good heel that can lead you and call a spot and just call matches and help you relax. And all you do is listen to them, and just follow their lead, and that really helps. So I work with guys like Gamma Singh or the Cuban Assassin or Jerry Morrow, guys who had been in the industry for 20, 30 years. And it was so much easier working with them because they would guide you through the whole match. And the fans couldn't even tell, they were very fluid, but you couldn't detect that they're communicating with wrestlers in the ring. They were really good at sort of lip syncing and calling the spots, and you just listened to them and did them, and then all you had to really remember was the finish, and maybe one or two spots that you'd maybe worked out before the match. But so it's certainly nerve-wracking and intimidating the first times you step in the ring, or if you're working with somebody you've never ever been in the ring with before. But it gets better and better each time, with more experience and as you gain a little more confidence. But and really, you shouldn't do a move in a ring or in a match that you haven't practiced. But sometimes, the guy you're working with will call it, and you just have to do it. And if they might call duck the clothesline, crossbody kick out, clothesline again, two arm drags, and you have to be ready to perform and execute, whatever it's called, even if you haven't actually practiced it beforehand. But the training, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and we certainly did train in the dungeon. The dungeon didn't have um, it had just a mat, but it didn't have ropes. It didn't have turnbuckles. So it was basically just where you did a lot of mat wrestling, and it had a very low ceiling. It had only about a 6.5 foot clearing. So it was fine for learning basic takedowns and counters, but it really wasn't good for doing stuff like off the top ropes or aerial maneuvers. But it and really that's what you should be learning first. You should be learning all your mat wrestling and things that come out of lockups and takeovers and reversals and that's what we did. We would do that for months before we ever worked out in a ring and did things off the top ropes or any aerial maneuvers or things like that. So it was better because too many guys when they're breaking in they want to do all the high spots and stuff off the ropes, but they haven't been well versed in mat or chain wrestling, and that has to come first.
Now, when you're learning all these maneuvers, you talked about a few minutes ago about having to improvise. Was there a moment where you were wrestling someone and right off the bat, someone had basically decided, hey, let's try this, and you didn't know what to do, and you had to kind of adjust?
Um, I can't think of anything in particular like that. I know there are sometimes finishes that were not executed right. They were botched, and then you'd have to go into something else, right? Um, I've had situations where we were working and we were supposed to maybe go like 20 minutes, and then the referee got a signal we had to wrap things up earlier, maybe because of a television time or something, and then we would have to condense or shorten the match. So you always had to be ready, especially when it was TV production. There's always a chance that you would be given the communication that the match had to go shorter, and or sometimes that you had to put in longer time, right? That you had to go a longer period. So usually the referee who had um, a hearing cue, from the dressing room, or maybe a signal from the timekeeper that the match had to go longer, they would communicate that to us. And usually the referee was really a good guy. They would tell us when it was time to go home. They had a good idea um, when it was close to that time. If it was like 15 minutes and the timekeeper called 15 minutes, then they would say, go home, and it's time to go into the finish.